It's great to be here today. Hopefully my first slide will come up. I always get worried maybe my slides are not going to work. And there's a couple of cattle there sniffing a box. And that brings up a really important thing about how animals perceive new experiences. If they can voluntarily approach something new, it's attractive. But if you suddenly shove it in their face, that's scary. If that box is blowing in the wind, they would not be approaching it. Also, you'll notice that there's some animals in the background not coming up. That's just the difference in kind of the temperament of the animal. Some are lower fear than others. You want to understand an animal, you got to get away from words. They don't think in words. It's a sensory-based world. And when I first started my work with cattle back in the 70s, I thought everybody thought in pictures the same way I did. I didn't know that people thought verbally. But being a visual thinker helped me in my work with cattle, because the very first thing I did is I looked at what they were seeing. There might be a coat hanging on a fence. That'd stop the animals from going through the chute. I see kind of pictures in my imagination. And this is a picture a young autistic man sent to me years ago to show how his movies in his head, old-fashioned kind of movies now, but I think in pictures. Okay, for example, if I think about, okay, my trip back home, I'm now seeing Heathrow. Okay, not really looking forward to that. You see, and that starts to come up like almost like a series of PowerPoint slides. Visual thinking is also associative thinking. And when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures. No, they don't. They don't. And visual thinkers like me, we're often really good at things like animals, understanding animals, photography, mechanics, would you believe, things like mechanics, and those are some of the things we're good at. Okay, I already mentioned the animals approaching the box. Novelty is both attractive and scary, depending on how it's presented. Sudden new things, they're frightening to both people with autism and to animals. Surprises scare. Same thing with animals. Surprises scare. Now this is a really great experiment that my student Megan Corgan did, because it proves something I've been saying for years. And this may explain why sometimes a horse spooks and there doesn't seem to be a reason for that horse spooking. So what she did is she took young fillies and colts that had already been halter broke but not trained to ride, walked them by this kid's play set 15 times until they no longer stopped, no longer put their head up. And when you rotate the play set, it becomes a new object. Now this was done at a slow walk, because I also informally did this experiment at a riding clinic with a green chair, with a really weird large green chair. Riders walking, absolutely. Like 10 times past that chair, rotated it, half the horses came to a hard stop. So if that had been done at a gallop, the riders would have been dumped off. Now the thing is, since a lot of people think verbally, if you saw this thing, you go, yeah, it's a kid's toy. You see, that's, you have this category of like a kid's toy. But when you look at that object, it looks totally different when it's turned. And I think this sort of thing can explain a lot of spooking that seems to not have a reason. Now, one experiment done by Leonard and Fent, they found if you train a horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella suddenly opening, one of those ones that opens automatically, that doesn't transfer to flags and a piece of canvas or tarp. See, think about it as a picture. Umbrellas look very different than flags or tarps. And I tell people, when they're getting animals ready for a show, you got to get them ready for the big three: flags, bikes, and balloons. And you want to get them used to that stuff before they go to a show. And do it gradually, like maybe hang flags on the fence in a large pasture, and the horses and the cattle will come up to that. Don't just shove it in the animal's face. That's what you don't want to do. Okay, and this just shows how shadows can change depending upon the time of day. This is in a chute. And on a cloudy day, there were no shadows at all, but you can see how it changes. And when they got these sharp shadows, you had a lot more animals stopping and refusing to move. Now, this is especially a problem in places like a meat plant or maybe a facility where they're vaccinated. They're not going through there every day. Now, an experienced dairy cow, she'd learn to walk over the shadows, but the new heifer is going to stop at it and put the head down. And you got to wait for that animal to bring the head back up before you try to push them. Now, here's an example of bad lighting. People say, oh, we can't get them loaded. And then I find out the sun is rising up over the top of the trailer, or they're going right into the really bright sun. So you might want to change the time of day that you are loading them. Now, I want to teach people to be a better observer. We had an almost total eclipse on our campus, and look at the weird shadows that the trees make of the eclipse. The trees act like pinhole cameras. I noticed these shadows. I didn't know eclipses did this with trees, and then I went online, yes, after, but I noticed this. I watched 100 students walk over this. This is on the sidewalk in front of our library on our campus. 100 students walked over these weird shadows. They didn't notice them. I did. Like if there's 1 pixel off in an electronic sign, I will notice it. 1 pixel off on it. Now here's just some examples of things that might make cattle refuse to go through a chute. Seeing a car through the fence. There's a little piece of red string up there. Some little thing that moves that we don't notice, they notice. That jug also moved just slightly. I call these things the distractions. And I get asked all the time, are animals afraid of getting slaughtered? No, they're more afraid of this kind of stuff. In fact, in one of the plants I worked with this spring, great big new plant just opened up, at 10 o'clock in the morning, everything was working just fine. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the spider monster appeared. And it was a shadow cast by an overhead framework. These Angus cattle decided they were not going to walk over the spider monster. So they had to build a roof over the facility to block the spider monster. So there's some worked great in the morning, worked terrible in the afternoon. Well, the shadows changed with the time of day. Chains hanging down. I find I still have to talk about this. I still have to talk about some of the same things. Taking chains out of there, get the coats off of the fences. Are they seeing people through the fence as they come up? Is there a dog there biting through the fence? These are all things that can affect handling. Now, I went down to Australia, and this handling facility was working really badly, and the problem was the truck being there. They had another one that worked fine, but it was in a building, so they couldn't see stuff like this. And I pointed out the truck. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I said, see that truck there that they were loading? So the cattle coming up this handling facility were seeing that truck. And then when I pointed out, they go, well, that's really obvious. Why didn't we see it? At another place I went to, a gate was just jiggling like this, just doing a little bit of jiggling. And that was causing a problem. I said, you've got to stop that gate from jiggling. And I find a lot of times people want to tear up the whole facility when all they needed to do was stop a gate from jiggling. Now, this is what I call the dark movie theater. Really sunny outside, dark inside the building. Now, at night, this will work just fine because the animals tend to move from the dark into the lighted building. But on a sunny day, it works really badly unless you do some things to help fix it, like maybe open a door up on the other side so that they can see light through the building. We got to start looking a lot more at what they're seeing. Now, some brain scan research showed that I got a big visual thinking circuit in my head. Extra big visual thinking circuit. That was kind of a mind blower for me when I saw these slides. There's another picture of that. And one of the things I'm bad at is I'm really bad at multitasking. Now, there's a lot of visual thinkers out there that could be really good at things like veterinary medicine, really good at a whole lot of things, but they can't do abstract math. Yeah. You see, one of the things about autism is you tend to be really good at one thing and really terrible at other things. This is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of thinkers. I'm what's called an object visualizer. It's a scientific name for it, object visualizer. Can't do algebra, but I worked with a lot of people that were very skilled at inventing mechanical equipment that were probably on the autism spectrum that had their own shops. We're losing skills right now. We're losing skills because those people aren't getting replaced. They got autism diagnosis, dyslexia, ADHD diagnosis, playing video games in the basement when they ought to be out in factories fixing things or out working with animals. But things like art, photography, mechanics, and yeah, art, mechanics, art, photography, those are some of the things that visual thinkers, really good at. Then you have the kid who's the little math genius. Music and math go together. They think in patterns, not pictures. Patterns instead of pictures. And there's scientific evidence that shows that the different kinds of thinking really does exist. And they do have a sample copy out there of my book, The Autistic Brain, where I discuss this. And then this fall, I've got a new book coming out called Visual Thinking, where I get deep into the science. And I'm very concerned that a lot of smart kids are just getting screened out. They get labeled. And one of the worst things the schools ever did was taking out all the hands-on classes. Art, sewing, woodworking, welding, auto shop, theater, music. Because how can a kid find out if he's good at something or she's good at something if they don't have a chance to try it? I get asked all the time, how did I end up in the cattle industry when I didn't come from that background? I was exposed to it as a teenager. So, kids have got to get exposed to different things. And then, of course, you got the verbal thinker. The verbal thinker tends to overgeneralize. And one of the big problems in the autism field is when the kids are little, I looked really terrible when I was little, but when they get older, you got Einstein and Elon Musk at one end of the spectrum, and you got somebody who can't dress themselves at the other end of the spectrum. And you put the same name on it. Michelangelo was probably autistic. Where would he end up today? Now, this horse got terrified of black cowboy hats because during a veterinary procedure, he got alcohol chucked in his eyes by somebody wearing a black cowboy hat. So white cowboy hat was good, black cowboy hat was bad. And when I put the hat on the ground, that hat was less scary. But then as I moved that hat closer and closer to my head, it got more and more scary. You see, it was like getting a picture match. You see, the fear memory stored as a graphics file, or maybe a sound. There was an elephant at the zoo that was terrified of diesel-powered equipment. If it ran with diesel, it was bad. If it ran with gas, it was good. But think about it. Diesel and gas engines sound different. You see, their memories are specific, since it's not words. Now, it's always easier to handle a calm animal. It takes 20 minutes for an animal to calm down once it gets all agitated and fearful. And we had a very bad situation that happened in our riding center with drones. So I have flags, bikes, and balloons. Now we got to train them to drones. Now, if the drone just up in the air like this, that's fine. But if it starts coming at a horse like a plane coming in from a landing, it's going to get the horses really scared. So we get out there. The news crew was out there, and they had these two horses. They were all tacked up in Western tack, absolutely terrified and unrideable. It took exactly 20 minutes for them to calm down, where we could ride them. Now they wanted some pictures. So with another person, we get on these horses, we're riding them. So what does this stupid drone operator does? He takes the drone like a plane coming in from a landing and goes right at us like this. That was really stupid. So that is another thing where we need to be working on getting horses and animals used to drones. That's another thing, because they're going to be around. Okay, it's now getting recognized in a lot of veterinary clinics in the U.S., but the importance of, reducing fear. Okay, an animal behaves badly when you're trying to work on it. It's because it's scared. So there's a veterinarian named Marty Becker doing a thing called fear-free. So the idea is to make it less scary for the pet. A lot of dogs are turning gray prematurely. There's a really great behavior person named Camille King. I've helped her with some of her scientific methods, but she does all the work. And she noticed in her behavior practice that a lot of dogs were turning gray by age 4. And both of these here are young dogs. And the ones that don't handle being home alone well, the ones that are really impulsive, get scared easily, more likely to turn gray. I think a lot of dogs today are leading too limited a life. We have draconian leash laws where I live, and dogs are afraid of everything. They're not getting exposed to enough stuff. And when I was a child, all the dogs ran around loose, and we had very few behavior problems. The bad news was car accidents. That was the bad news. But in looking at the welfare stuff, talked this morning about the horses, they need to get out. Dogs don't get out. chance to socialize with other dogs, check out their P-mail on the local tree. I see people just yanking them away from that. Now, fear is the main emotion in autism, and so I really relate to prey species animals. They get scared easily. That's something that I relate to. Fear is my main emotion. It's now controlled with antidepressant drugs. Better living through chemistry. Okay, let's look at the word personality is starting to get into the animal literature. 25 years ago, when I did a paper on cattle behavior, the reviewers would not let me use the word fear. I had to change it to agitated behavior. It was a paper I did in the early 90s. You know, now the fear word, we're allowed to use it. I did a paper in 1997 called Assessment of Stress During Handling and Transport. Now it's the first time that the fear word had appeared in veterinary literature. Sort of like we get silos in science. You know, the neuroscientists have been using that word forever. Paul Hemsworth from Australia, one of the first people to get the fear word into the literature. But now we're getting a lot of different terminology. Low fear, high fear, and bold and shy are the same thing. They're the same thing. And the bold dog, the low fear dog, when you put it in the animal shelter, less likely to get sick because it doesn't get as stressed. You see, there's an interaction between what we do to animals and their genetics. Do animals have emotions? I always thought it was silly to say that dogs didn't have emotions. Prozac works on dogs. It's very popular these days in the US. The neurotransmitters are the same. Yeah, I think it's ridiculous to say that animals don't have emotions. I think some of the arguments, and some of this is still going on whether or not animals are conscious and all kinds of stuff like this gets down to verbal thinking versus more sensory-based thinking. See, if you're a highly verbal person, where all your thoughts are words, you'd have a hard time imagining maybe a dog or a horse could even think, where it seemed obvious to me. Now, obviously, there's things that dogs can't do, fly to the moon, for example. They're not going to do that. Here's a fascinating study I found recently on horse genetics, on two little genetic changes associated with the domestication of the horse. There was a little tiny bit of code change that made more serotonin neurons. Sounds like the Prozac gene. Probably shouldn't be calling it that. And then another genetics that got changed was something that a genetic code involved with back pain. So when these two little genetic changes happened in the horse, the use of horses just took off. And the chariot got invented. That's like a horse sports car. Okay, the core emotions. I really like Jack Panskep's core emotions. These have been around for a while, but to me, they make the most sense. I have quite a strong neuroscience background. You know, and there's subcortical centers that, you know, where the different emotions are located. You have fear, or shy and bold. You have anger. You have separation distress. Take the colt away from the mare, take the calf away from the mama. That's separation distress. Or the dog is ripping up the house because you left it alone at home. Separation distress. It's a different emotion than fear. Then you have seek, or the exploration drive, the urge to explore. Then you have sex behavior. You've got mother-young nurturing, and you've got play. And different parts of the brain control these emotions. Now, you get into some of the really fine neuroscience, you're going to find that, like the amygdala, for example, fear center, has got some non-fear neurons in it. But when you go back to the old-fashioned invasive experiments that you absolutely can't do today, you burn up the amygdala completely, the animal will have no fear. Rats will no longer be afraid of cats. Monkeys will be down running around on the floor instead of climbing off the projector if you turn them loose in this room. Yeah, you burn the whole thing out. It's mainly fear. Now, I like to kind of look at how these emotions, where experience has an effect on it. You can have an animal that's a high fear animal, but if he's been gradually exposed to a whole lot of different things, you won't see that fear response. When that animal's in an environment where he can feel secure. And so both experience and genetics affect how an animal's going to react. And there was a really interesting experiment done at New Mexico State University with high and low seek or high and low exploration cattle, GPS trackers on them. Some go out and graze a whole bunch, others lay around the water hole. And they call them the go-getter and the laid back. You can actually find it if you type in go-getter and laid back. You can find this find this paper. Also, there's been research that show that some cattle are more willing to climb up steep hills than other cattle, and it's related to sire. But when I kind of look at behavior, I mean, going back to the Jack Panskep emotions, that makes the most sense to me. Now, I can't emphasize enough the importance of a non-slip floor. All right, I'd like to show this to vet students. How many of you noticed that that dog's in the brace position? Yeah, let's get a mat on that table so it doesn't slip. Let's just start with the simple things, and then you go, oh, I don't want to bother cleaning that mat. I said, why don't you have the owner go buy a bath mat with a rubber backing on it, get the puppy used to it, they bring it in, put it on the table, take it home and clean it. So now you got no excuse for not having a non-slip floor. And the other thing, we need to teach puppies to have their paws held so that nail trims aren't warfare. That's another thing. I went to a zoo recently, and they demonstrated to me how they could get their lion to jump up on the screen, and they could trim his toenails while they were stuffing meatballs in his mouth with tongs. One hand stuffing the meatballs in with tongs, the other hand trimming the nails. Okay, so you got a lion cooperating on that, and we can't do that with a dog. You know, that's going to be in my next slideshow. He's on my phone. This is ridiculous. You know, people need to be working on training the animal to tolerate some of this stuff so we don't have to have a war with them. And I find that lots of times that people are more interested, well, let's redecorate the veterinary clinic for fear-free. That's not where I'm coming from. Let's get the non-slip mat. Let's work with the owners to train their animals to tolerate strange people touching them. Yeah, it's okay for strange people to touch you. I really love the work of Gregory Burns. He trains dogs to voluntarily go in the MRI machine. And yes, when they smell their favorite person, the emotion centers light up. Gregory Burns. He has the funniest book. He describes smuggling dogs into the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning when he first started, and training dogs to lay in the brain with a brain scanner model he made in his basement out of a big cardboard tube and plywood. But they go in there voluntarily. He says, most dogs you can train to do this. There's a few where it's just too noisy. Oh, and they have to wear earmuffs. They have to get used to having earmuffs on their head. Now, do animals feel pain? I'll have ranchers say to me, well, they can't be in that much pain because those calves went right up and drank water and ate right after we castrated them or dehorned them. Well, you see, a prey species animal covers it up that they hurt, especially when they know they're being watched. But these experiments with self-medication, these are stuff I like to show students, say, yeah, they really do feel pain. And poor old sheep, you can torture them, and they don't protest. Ultimate prey species animal. Now, if you get one sheep separated from the flock, he's going to go ba, 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 ba. But he can have his hide half ripped off by coyotes, and he'll do everything he can to act totally normal because he doesn't want to advertise to the predators that he's hurt. And this is another one of my students did this research where they took dogs and they came into an animal shelter. Half just got put in the cage, they're the controls. The other half got to have a 45-minute fun time with my student before they got put in the cage at the animal shelter. Test salivary cortisol the next day, it was lower. Then it went right back up because they only did it once. So what does that tell me? A volunteer needs to come in every day and take every dog out for 45 minutes of a good time every day. They need people. It's that simple. Now, do pressure wraps work to help calm dogs down? Camille did another experiment, and she found that if you leave a dog alone in a kennel, either with the pressure wrap on or one that's like 2 sizes too big so there's no pressure, so you control for clothes, that the pressure on the body reduced the heart rate, and it was more effective if the dog was not medicated, and it reduced the behavior staring at the door, waiting for Camille to come back. So it seemed to have some benefits on the separation distress more than reducing something like fear of thunder. And the idea for the pressure wrap came from my squeezing machine. I had horrible panic attacks all through puberty, my 20s. I noticed cattle going in a squeeze chute kind of sometimes calmed down, so I built a squeeze chute for myself. And you can see that I did some skilled trades there. There's the rear view, worked up with an air cylinder. The other reason why it worked is because I could control it. So if you're working with autistic kids, If they're afraid of something like a loud noise, like a vacuum cleaner, let the kid control the vacuum cleaner. Because if they can control that sound, oftentimes they can tolerate it better. Now, I love this paper. Solitary mammals provide an animal model for autism. Panthers and leopards are less social than lions. And there's a genetic and hormonal link with autism. Is a leopard abnormal? You see, I think in the milder forms, autism is just a personality variant. And then in the more severe forms, yes, like speech delay, yep, that's abnormal. I had delayed speech till age 4. But the thing that's interesting, it's been showing up in some of the research lately, and I've got a lot of this written up in the 3rd edition of Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. They got most of the autism books here, but they didn't get the animal books. That genetic code involved with, I might say, mental disorders in people is just associated with normal behavior variation in animals. I think that's really, really interesting. The friendliness genes in dogs is related to Williams syndrome in people. Super friendly. They're not very smart, unfortunately. Okay, we've bred dogs to really pay attention to people. We've bred them to need people a lot more than the wolf. Does that make wolves autistic? I don't know. That's debatable. But if you kind of look at everything, half the population is going to be more social, and half the population is going to tend to be more interested in things rather than social. One of the ways for autistic people to get friends is through shared interests. Let me tell you what's a good airplane flight. I sat next to a lady construction manager, and we had a fascinating conversation about concrete tilt-up warehouse construction and concrete forming systems. Now, that is just so much fun to talk about, just a great flight, talking about that kind of stuff. You see, that's being interested in what you do. And one of the things that's given me satisfaction in life has been having an interesting career. Career is really important. And I worked with a lot of skilled tradespeople that have their own shops, that built my equipment, have multiple patents. They definitely would have been labeled autistic today, definitely. But now they're retiring and not getting replaced. We've got a serious skills loss problem. Right now in the US, if you want a poultry processing plant, you're importing it from Holland in 100 shipping containers. Now you're hearing some of the talk that I give to educators. We're paying the price for taking shop class out 25 years ago. And some states now are putting some of those classes back in. And I can tell you, you don't need algebra for any of this stuff. This is acting as a really big gatekeeper. I don't know any veterinarian who uses high-level algebra and calculus in the veterinary practice. And then people will say to me, well, you need algebra for dosing. I go, you memorize those few formulas. Like pi times the radius squared. Okay, if I don't size that air cylinder correctly, I'm either going to bust myself or bust the machine. Yeah, pi times the radius squared. I know how to do that. See, that's a specific formula for a very specific thing. The same genes that give human beings a gigantic brain are also involved with schizophrenia and autism. Price we pay for a big, huge brain. And then the solitary mammals thing, that's at Reiser et al., 2014. Really, really like that paper. And then Sikala and Searle's paper, 2018. Some really cool papers. These are things I find when I'm surfing around online. Now, the point I want to get across with this slide is that when you force an animal to do something, you're going to get a lot more fear stress compared to it voluntarily cooperating. Okay, we've got trained antelope voluntarily cooperating with having injections, having blood draws. You get very low levels of cortisol. You force animals to do things, you get big, huge amount of fear stress. Now here's antelopes at the Denver Zoo. We did this back in the 90s, Nancy Erlbeck, and no one thought we could train these flighty animals. You have to go through a long habituation phase of training them to things like a sliding door opening. That takes 10 days. So the first day you move it like 1 inch and they go in the orient. When an animal orients like this, when deer do that, the brain's deciding, am I going to keep watching or am I going to go crazy right now with fear? There's like a switch. Don't push them past that orienting phase. But we trained them. And the zoos have been doing a really good job of training their animals to cooperate with veterinary procedures. I can't emphasize enough the importance of good stockmanship. The thing I have found is people want the thing the new corral system, the fancy redecorated vet clinic, the computer, or some drug that's going to instantly solve all their problems. They want the thing more than they want the management. And stockmanship is the management side of things. And when I was young, I thought I could build a self-managing cattle handling facility. That is complete rubbish. I don't believe that now. Okay, make sure an animal's first experience with a vet clinic or horse trailer, anything new, is a good first experience. Because if a first experience with something new, like a new person, a new horse trailer, a new vet clinic or whatever, is bad, boy, they don't forget it. First experiences that are bad make long-lasting impressions. Now, sometimes if a horse is with a familiar, safe caregiver, it gets less scared when confronted with something new or taken to a new place. Animals make categories. When I'm on the leash, I protect, and when I'm off the leash, I can go play. I know this nice big black dog named Millie, and when she's outside the cab of the cattle truck that her master drives, she's your friend. But she's in that cab of that truck, you stick your hand in there, she'll bite it off. When I'm in the truck, I protect. When I'm outside the truck, I'm everybody's best buddy. Now, both the autistic brain, computers, are bottom-up thinkers. People on the autism are bottom-up thinkers. We got to get these kids out doing things. Too many of them are too overprotected. And the thing is, we wouldn't even have this computer, this laptop would not exist without some autism. You see, you have the visual thinkers like me doing really mechanical parts of engineering, and the mathematicians doing things like computers, programming, music, chemistry, physics. And I talked to an interesting lady just the other day. She and her husband build race cars. He does the mathematics, like on compression ratios. She's the one who fixes the engine because he can't figure out how to put them together. So this is where you need both the visual thinker like me, who's getting screened out of the school system because we can't do abstract math. You need us. Some of your best veterinary students are getting screened out right now because they can't pass the algebra requirement and never have passed an algebra class. Now, if I was going to do chemistry, yes, I would need it, but I don't do chemistry. I do animal stuff, photography stuff, and I do mechanical equipment design stuff. And basically, the way the autistic brain works, or bottom-up thinking works, is you take specific examples and you put them into categories, like on a spreadsheet. The animal does the same thing. Categories, it's bottom-up. Verbal's very top-down. And one of the big problems in the autism field is overgeneralizing. You got the same name applied to Einstein as applied to somebody who can't dress themselves. Doesn't make very much sense. And I was fascinated when I found out that computers are also bottom-up thinkers. All your artificial intelligence programs, those things that give you all that, we recommend that you watch this, that's all bottom-up thinking. Okay, let's do a little livestock handling. I always need to talk about basics. Here's the flight zone and some shape. Now, if I had tame show shape, there's going to be no flight zone. And when I enter the flight zone of these black Angus, they move away. But you can see the tan one that's looking at me, he's not getting up. So it's actually two zones. There's the flight zone where they move away. And then there's a zone of influence where they know you're there. They don't move away, but they turn around and look at you. Now, one of the problems we have is different names for this different things. So you have the flight zone where they move away, and then you have the zone of influence, know you're there, want to see you zone, pressure zone, and then you've got the cattle that are so far away you have no effect on their behavior. Okay, here's a handy-dandy way to get cattle or sheep to go forward in a single-file race. You simply quickly walk back by them. And all these diagrams are on my website on Grandin.com. I've got these diagrams. And how did I get my business started? Let's look at people who mentored me. When I was young, I was my speech therapist, getting me talking, my mother, my third grade teacher. But when I got to be a teenager and a young adult, the thing that's interesting is the people that helped me the most weren't the medical people. They were Ann out at the ranch. They were Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, a NASA space scientist. They were Jim, the contractor, who helped me get my business started, showed me how to set up a business. I didn't have any idea how to do that. But what I learned is when you're weird, you show off your work. Sell the work instead of yourself. And there's the drawing I sent to Cargill. I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. Steel and concrete work. That's the drawing I sent to Mr. Fielding, right there. Show the work. And you might wonder why it's curved. As the cattle come on around this bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. So you're using a natural behavior. That was one of the pictures that got sent to Mr. Fielding. Show off the work. Non-slip flooring, I can't emphasize that enough. All right, now we got a little test. How many of you, raise your hands, saw that that animal was looking at the sunbeam? Oh no, we're as bad as school administrators here. When I show this same picture with the same caption, it's a decoy caption. Little kids, half the hands go up. Zookeepers, a lot of them are dyslexic. They'll see it more. But now you look at that, that's obvious. And that sunbeam might only be there at certain times a day. It won't be there all the time. But you can look at it now, that animal's looking right at that sunbeam. Okay, I've done a lot of work on animal welfare auditing. And I get asked all the time what I'm most proud of. I'm really proud of the animal welfare auditing because it really worked. And you have to have very simple metrics in the commercial world. You know, there's the welfare quality system, had a lot of great scoring tools in it, but the whole program was too complicated. When you're working in a commercial world, the reality is a day-and-a-half workshop to train an auditor and 2 shadow audits with an experienced auditor. That's the commercial reality. So if things are not simple, it's not going to work. Now, you start measuring stuff, then you start managing it. Let's just take lameness in cattle, for example. I was on a conference call right before I came here, and I said, we're going to measure at the audit, we're going to measure lameness, mobility scoring. And the veterinarian, really good veterinarian, goes, well, that's not a whole leg and foot care system. Well, I agree with that. But what the lameness scoring is, it's a screening test. Yeah, because there might be 10 different things that are causing that lameness. But if it can't, you have to figure out what are the really important key welfare indicators. Okay, now this is handling measurements. This is part of our beef quality assurance. This is also very similar to what I used with the meat packing plants back over 20 years ago when we implemented the McDonald's audits. And I saw more improvement in 6 months than I'd seen in my whole career before that because they had to make certain figures. They couldn't shoot 95% on the first shot, fail the McDonald's audit. That's simple. Very clear metrics. Now this is handling out in the big feed yard. These are actually really good numbers because the prod score used to be 500%, not 5.5%. So you manage things that you measure. I like to use traffic as a model. Okay, if I was going to just get most of my public safety advantages, I'd only need to measure 5 things. Drunk driving, speeding, stopping violations, seatbelts, and texting. That would do it. They are the key safety indicators for driving. And here is the data from the McDonald's audits in 1996. I did baseline data for the USDA. It was terrible. And you know what the main cause of that bad stunning was? Busted equipment. Busted equipment. And I've got quite a few papers in the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association on this, back on 1998, 2002, 2001. And when you have a big customer measuring this stuff, boy, what a difference. 75 plants, most of the big beef plants in the US, only 3 plants had to build expensive stuff. 3 plants had to do very expensive remodels. But all the other plants out of the 75, we did a lot of non-slip flooring. We did a lot of changes in lighting, because they don't like going into dark places, and a lot of training, moving small groups of animals. Good handling is going to require more walking. Now that's the original data from one of my students on temperament testing. And the number 4 animals, they had lower weight gains. Cattle go berserk when you handle them, lower weight gains. Now we've done 25 years of temperament selection. Have we gone too far? Are we going to lose mothering behavior? Okay, you don't want to over-select for any temperament because you're going to end up messing up your animal. It's just that simple. But there are genetic differences in how well a cow defends her calf, for example. And then the Brahman breed, if you treat them right, they actually love to be stroked. Probably shouldn't say they love to be stroked. But when we talk about positive emotions in animals, they will stretch their head out. They obviously like it. Dairy cows like to use those motorized brushes. I think that's definitely some positive emotions. All right, critical control points or key welfare indicators, the same thing. Critical control points, core criteria are the same thing. So let's just take something like a dairy, for example. Handling scoring, I already showed you that. There's like 5 things on that. Okay, swollen hocks and knee joints, lameness, dirty. Okay, I have an indoor dairy. I'm going to go after dirty, lameness, and swollen hocks. I'm not going to tell you how to build a dairy, but you get bad scores on any of those things. You got something you have to fix. You could have a leg conformation problem. Your stalls could be too small. You didn't bed them. See, my kind of approach is very simple. Well, there's certain things you must not have in your system, but I want to give you freedom to design your dairy stalls the way you might want to design them. Body condition, you get too many skinny ones. Open mouth breathing at rest, that's heat stress in cattle, it's that simple. Coat condition, we have our organics more strict on drug use than yours is. Well, you got coughing cattle or lice, they got hair falling out. No, that's not okay. It's not okay. But you look at these things here, you get good scores on these things, the place is probably pretty good. Broiler chicken, going to measure space requirements by walking into them. If they can't move a meter away without piling, you got too many birds in the building. I also put the emphasis on stuff I can directly observe. Every way to cheat and falsify a record, I've caught them doing it. Yeah, it's important to have good records, but the reason why I don't have mortality data in there is they can lie to me about that. They can lie to me about how many chickens are in a building. So I'm going to put the emphasis on the key indicators that I can see, and it's simple. Now, I was very interested in the talk this morning. There's no way in a commercial system I can measure 75 emotion indicators. There's no way. Now, the thing with the 4 things, that's getting down to something I might be able to train in a day-and-a-half workshop, and I've trained a bunch of people. But this is the commercial reality. If I'm running a supply chain, I got to think about what I absolutely don't want in my supply chain. Like, for example, no sow stalls. Well, then they got to not be using sow stalls. It's just that simple. Or no small battery cages. So I can have some stuff I prohibit, but then I want to give that producer the freedom to innovate, within that system. All right, lameness is a really good key indicator, because look at all the bad things here that can make them lame. Okay, that's up for veterinarians to fix this stuff. But the lameness or the mobility scoring is the way that you screen that there's a problem. And then these things you have to work on getting them fixed. Leg conformation, we've been breeding more and more and more for meat, lots and lots of meat, and we're ending up getting more problems with conformation of the legs. We've had problems with this in pigs too. And then we'll make them lame if they walk around on their dew claws. There's a post-legged animal. That's not going to be a very good bull. There's a really hideous foot on a pig. Now, 25 years ago, I saw the pig industry start making these mistakes. Then about 10 years ago, seeing some of these same defects in cattle. And it all got back to selecting strictly for meat traits. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't select for meat traits, but the previous speaker brought up this sort of bad becoming normal idea with behavior in the horse. Well, we can get bad becoming normal, some of this leg stuff. Crooked claw, that's another genetic problem in cattle. All right, I want to show you how traits are linked. I love these experiments by Behaviour. Years ago, Behaviour wanted to breed a gray fur fox that wouldn't tear your hand off. So for 20 generations or so, we selected for a nice, gentle fox. Here's the original there. That's what he got. Look at how it changed. Now, who would have believed that coat color was connected to temperament? Traits are linked. I kind of like to look at genetic selection sort of like a national budget. If I put all the selection into the product or the economy, meat, milk, or eggs, I shortchange my infrastructure, heart, reproduction, bone. and I shortchanged my military, which is the immune. Right now, we've got beef cattle getting congestive heart failure, late-stage deaths, and it's got a big genetic basis. We're breeding these Anguses to be wider and wider and wider. Now, we've probably already started the domestication process in deer. I took this picture 5 years ago. 30 years ago, when I first went to New Zealand, there was no way you could get in the pen with deer. I'm going to bash on the bulldog. That's what it used to look like. How'd you get to this? Okay, well, you've got a verbal standard that says massive head. But where do you stop on the massive head? That's the 1938 version of the bulldog. You can look that picture up, Bulldog's Dilemma, on Google Images. You can find it. How'd you get from that? How did that turn into... You see, that's bad becoming normal here. Can't breathe, can't walk. That's an extreme horse. And it was already brought up, previous speaker, on we've got to do more than just prevent suffering. Does the animal have a life worth living? It's not just preventing suffering. Does this animal have a life worth living? These are heavy broilers, and this is a little scale for weighing broilers, and actually we're jumping up on it. So when you get into the whole broiler controversy, if you do them absolutely right, you can have a heavy bird that's okay. You make one little mistake, they don't tolerate mistakes. Like bad breeder eggs, you're going to have lame broilers, dead ones, all kinds of problems. Heavy birds, you got to do them right. You have to have extremely high level of management. Okay, I want to just talk about some of my books there that in the animal world, Animals in Translation. I talk about how visual thinking and autism help me understand animals. And these are the books I really want to show you. Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach. It's aimed at students, people that actually have to do it in the field. And then Genetics in the Behavior of Domestic Animals. We've got a new version that just came out, and it has a whole lot of little pictures of different kinds of animals on the cover. So we'll leave those up there to look at. And we've got 15 minutes for questions. And if nobody has a question, I'm going to start picking people. That's what I'm going to do.